on? We are. Action. Do we have audio? So where are we headed, Dushan?
We are headed to the Brickworks in the Don Valley, so a little taste of nature and old industrialism.
Fabulous.
Continue east.
Mary, do you want to tell us about what your idea was? We're bouncing.
In terms of structure or what my specific...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking that rather than having a moderator, we would each pose a question to the group as a whole and kind of all discuss it rather than have, I guess, two people discuss one person's question.
Perfect.
All participate.
Sounds good.
Okay. I was thinking that we could... I'm not opposed to going through the readings one by one, but I think it'd be interesting to kind of just immediately go into where they intersect.
Agreed.
Yeah, the Harding paper, I think that there's a lot of food there for talking about the intersection, so maybe we can make the Harding paper be the primary source and then talk about Sandoval's ideas and Latour's requirements supporting Harding's piece. I think that that would really work.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
I always thought that this guy looked really trans, queer positive. It's a pretty androgynous figure up there.
I haven't been this far down on Queen before.
We're going to East
Where are you
End.
guys? Oh, that's nice. There's actually a bike sticker.
I
on
know. I was just thinking about how great that is. Capture that. We could talk about Toronto and biking all day long.
If we slowed down... Oh, I thought that was a biker. I was like, we can get both.
Slowed down. Oh, I thought that was a biker. I was like, we can get both.
I was kind of focused on the tours.
Thoughts on the readings thus far?
The tours work and the whole notion of articulation. I know he used scent, obviously, to lay out his framework. For me, I mean, being quite visual, sight works a little better. I was kind of thinking it as you gain multiple articulations, you're essentially gaining binocular vision. You know, starting to actually see. I mean, with only one articulation or one solitary viewpoint, you don't actually get the form of a subject or the form of the observation or the reality, or it's a poor word to use. What am I trying to say? Anyway, as you gain basically stereoscopic vision, you start to realize there's more to a form than what you can immediately see from one side.
That's exactly what Sandoval's talking about in relation to the differential oppositional consciousness. That as you look through these different lenses, the lens in which you're viewing things becomes a method itself. So the more articulate you are, clearer vision.
I really like the metaphor of sight for Latour over... I was kind of thinking of it in terms of like literacy and like reading systems and like the more... I don't know, the metaphor kind of falls apart. I really like the idea of vision over like systems because that's where I was getting kind of hung up with Latour. Is his relationship with language.
Yeah, it's something I think, I mean, maybe I wouldn't even consider vision to be purely sight, maybe at first. And one of the experiences that came to mind for me was when I first started training as an artist. We had a bunch of painting and drawing workshops, and there was very simple mandates or descriptions of how to start to see certain things and then capture them visually. And one of them was where there's a plane change, there's a tone change. Now it's quite a simple notion on the surface, but to actually capture that and then to see it. And I remember the first time after like a couple months of initial learning and drawing and struggling, I remember the day that really hit home, and all of a sudden the world became like hyper 3D.
Yes.
And every single thing had a form that I couldn't shake, and it was almost disturbing. It was like, and almost like being reborn or something, to be like really kind of perhaps cheesy about it. And then same too came with our explorations on color, so seeing light and dark. And I'm actually quite a poor painter, but again, I remember walking home in the winter after some lesson when it kind of hit home, and with the yellow street lamps and the blue of the night on the snow, of course, which was pristine white at the time. The world was like an acid trip. I mean, I didn't want to leave the outside because everything was like hyper yellow and hyper blue.
Life is so high def.
Yeah, and it faded, but it's never disappeared. It's now part of like an internalized, understanding or comprehension, or just simply a set of articulations that I can see.
I think a lot of the reason why Latour would privilege language over vision is kind of unpacked in a little bit in Harding's piece, where it's just the case that that's the kind of knowledge structures that we understand and operate within, and that there's a lot of opportunity for visual knowledge structures to be incorporated into our scientific practice.
Agreed. Mary, thoughts?
The language issue, I guess, I saw it kind of running as a thread through the other readings as well, and they all kind of problematized information management, codes, I guess different forms of literacy as being oppressive. Like in Harding, she's talking about this specific mode of scientific inquiry, and in Sandoval, she says that hegemonic feminism itself is a code, and it's a very specific form of literacy that's marginalizing a lot of groups of people.
Right.
I don't know.
I think that one thing that accounts for language and puts it on the pedestal is that it is kind of the case that we're just the kind of being that can use language, that it's this amazing, wonderful, powerful mode of existence. And you can participate in it. And it does lead to a lot of problems with literacy, absolutely. But using language specifically the way that Latour has...
So we have to go up at some point.
Well, I think that idea kind of takes those oppressive literacies, that there's multiple articulations for a single word, and I think if that were applied to those oppressive literacies, then that would kind of open them up. But I don't necessarily...
Go Don Valley North for a very short period. Sorry, so can you repeat? So it opens up specific literacies.
I think that idea kind of takes those oppressive literacies, that there's multiple articulations for a single word, and I think if that were applied to those oppressive literacies, then that would kind of open them up. More effective than adding more articulation. I don't know.
I think Harding would say adding more articulations
to single literacy or producing another one. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, Latour says that as well, right? It's like more articulations make the world a richer place.
Right.
More embodied place.
Yeah. And to separate our body and our multiple articulations into a techno-scientific stratification and territorialization is useful on one hand, but on another it creates artificial distances and assumes a certain understanding, which I think is what everything's kind of getting at. So we should be taking the next exit.
Exit right. Hi, welcome. My name is Teresa Slater.
I'm Mary Callahan-Baumstark.
And I'm Dushan Noich.
And we're here today to film for the DOCC 2014 FemTechNet, discussing feminism and technology through the graduate program at the Ontario College of Art and Design University in Toronto, Ontario.
kill those mosquitoes.
So I can learn how to do the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Say one of the questions I think, or one of the things that came to mind through all of this, looking back, was this whole idea of like a personal dataverse.
What do you mean by that?
That's the question. I don't remember who it was in. It might have been Sandeveld.
Sandoval talked about it, but it was from the Differences video.
It was, right.
Yeah.
So in the difference video, she mentions like a dataverse, and I was thinking about how like just my exposure even to the Feminism and Dialogues course and the readings and all that, and everybody's opinions and our articulations found through getting new articulations through experiences and objects and the rest, is actually just an expansion. It's a type of expansion of your dataverse, kind of thing, right? Or what you even might consider data, because when you pass over things, right, that's your own bias.
Right.
But when you know, as you get these articulations, more things become data that you take in. So it's like, I mean, this is sort of language. It's your multiverse, your dataverse, your whatever. But it's like you stop passing over things, you start to take them in, as opposed to just
Start to articulate them.
yeah.
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 That's really interesting. I guess how would that...
Oh, it's a raccoon.
Up on the very top.
Right in the corner.
Sorry. I find that idea of kind of a dataverse interesting when Sandoval kind of talks about topography as opposed to typology, and how would you orient kind of place in that idea. I suppose like these discussions, are they places that you're moving through and then like obtaining, or are they just are they information that you're taking, or both? I mean,
Yeah, I see what you mean. Go ahead.
That these spaces that we're talking about, that we inhabit as producers of knowledge, as purveyors of knowledge, as consumers of knowledge, are spoken about in really specific language. I feel in Harding's piece, where she identifies the subject citizen as being someone that's able to kind of like, and it goes a little bit into the Ung's neoliberals in paper two, that there are these overlaps. There's this typography that we use, and we can identify particular areas that maybe lack articulation, and how we can engage in those spaces. But then also I wonder, as someone takes over those spaces, what kind of articulations are being made. It's always related to science, technology. It's related to industry and innovation. And what Harding's trying to say is that these dataverses that we're in, she doesn't really give a method for how we can make them, like, she doesn't want to use the language of it being a better science, like a good science or a bad science, but in some ways we still have these forces that we're working against as we articulate our own spaces, with technology specifically. So these are the kind of spaces that are being kind of filled up right now, the holes in the jigsaw.
I think that Latour addresses that actually really well when he's talking about like what makes an interesting articulation, and so like the dataverses that kind of the scientific inquiry occupies currently isn't asking, according to Latour, it sometimes does not ask interesting questions.
Exactly.
And it doesn't.
Yeah.
It pursues statements that are already seen as true, or it like pursues facts. And I think by examining these areas of difference and these areas where there's multiple articulations, where there's multiple possibilities, and they are contradictory, those are the kind of areas where this kind of new inquiry would come. And like looking at cultural sciences and social sciences that Harding kind of talks about, these are areas of intersect and areas of conflict, and they're areas that aren't like rational, they're not pure. I think those are the kind of, I don't know. I'm having a hard time ending my idea.
But these are open-ended questions, and they're still being wrestled with, right? And I think it's something to go along with the dataverse and to expand it somewhat past, but also including this whole techno-scientific problematic that's always being raised. is I think I was thinking of travel as well. So even when you travel somewhere, whether it's literally a town next to yours or it's across the world, those experiences, events, people you meet, food you have, whatever that may be, abuses by customs, who knows, become part of your articulations, particularly when you return. So then you start to question your own social fabric, your
local knowledge system.
Yeah, and I think that Latour brings that up as well, where part of the new sort of diagrammatic might suggest to run scientific inquiry would be to start to consider everything that's around the scientists as well, right? So he states that you're making it a more complex and more difficult thing to do good science, because now you're saying, what are you doing within your surroundings, not only within your own particular lab practice.
And that's the importance of Sandoval's differential oppositional consciousness as well, is that it's not just that somebody interested in production of knowledge can look to their peripheral. It's not just about filling in areas of knowledge, but specifically addressing within those areas of knowledge where the conflict occurs and making space for that kind of conversation.
I'd kind of like to go back to your idea of travel briefly. And I was kind of thinking about this on the way here, but there's this opening of articulations when you go from one place that you know to a place that you don't know. But I think that the way that you get there, and this kind of goes into Sandoval's like topography, but I think that the way that you get there is also a really interesting articulation. For instance, if you're to drive from one end of the country to the other, that's a completely different articulation than flying from one end of the country to another. It's kind of like you arrive differently, and I think there's obviously room for more articulations just in like the time period that it would take for you to drive rather than fly. But I think that the ground that you cover is very important there between your kind of destinations. And I think with Sandoval's kind of idea of the different phases of feminism, it's like the ground that's covered between the phases that's really important, as opposed to just these like isolated places.
That you really get to the heart of the matter when you're operating within all 4 or 5 of those phases, being, like the equality and the supremacy and the revolutionary ideas, that all those things need to operate at the same time to make for essentially good and articulate information.
Yeah, and I think that being like between and within and without at the same time is really important. Not necessarily that they all need to be happening at the exact same time, but maybe moving between them quickly or occupying them at the same time.
I think that's an interesting analogy too, or you could apply travel in different modalities of travel. Because obviously the time it takes, the temporality, the speed, the way you're sitting, who you're dealing with that time. You could be in a car alone, or you're on an airplane with a bunch of people, all that. Each one of those in some ways could be applied to, if you think about any kind of movement, let's say feminism in this case. Over its lifetime, as it's developed, it has driven across the country, it has flown, it has taken a boat, it has walked, and each of those become the articulations, not to a particular, I would say, spot, but it's starting to get a richer view and a richer conception of like the topology or the landscape that it's dealing in, which is making it richer, and I think more and more important, because now it's truly getting a grasp of and revealing the complexity of our interactions.
That movement that we're talking about would be considered a strategy, in the sense that it's the way that feminism has had an opportunity to exist, and kind of like confronting the different changes as it's been as it's grown. But then to take that and in kind of hindsight and use it more as a method is where we get to be tactical. We can say that this particular conflict requires this type of lens, and that's how we can really see some change move.
I think that's the new metaphor. I like the idea of travel. I think driving here, great metaphor acting.
Absolutely.
I mean, something too to say that where a strategy as opposed to a tactic, it's almost like the grand strategy is to keep moving. That's very, very ephemeral, but in a very good way, right? Because to go back to my usual Deleuzian terminology. Like that's what he's always calling for, is like situate yourself, try to have an affect or an effect, and then move and create new structures around you, and then move to new ones as powers start to clue into where you are. I think feminism has adopted that to like.
I think that, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but this is something that I've been looking at. In some ways, I feel that the idea of movement as like the kind of like be all end all doesn't allow for some of the decolonization processes that Sandoval gets to at the end, where she wants to say that we have these movements and that we can tactfully use them, but it's just like talking about travel, but also when you're talking about being kind of like the space in between, that as an oppositional consciousness, we want to be like motivating movement, but also kind of staying outside of whatever praxis we're operating with. I think that it's a really, do you understand what I'm saying? I think that it kind of, we got led there with Sandoval, but I don't think that I'm articulating it properly.
Well, no, go ahead.